Good morning, everyone. Let's wait a couple of minutes.
Whilst we're waiting to start, if anyone's got any technical questions, start typing them in the chat, and I'll try and either answer them in the flow of the presentation, or just randomly take a break and answer some nice technical questions. You certainly gave me some food for thought last time we did this. So go on, try me, see if I can understand it.
I think we can start.
Okay, you got my screen up there?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can see me. Yeah, if you don't, please shout, because I'll just keep on talking anyway. Okay, right. Good morning, everybody. Jason Fox here again, and this is the final one of my presentations on NGSI-LD plus whatever, and this one is connecting NGSI-LD to legacy systems, IoT, and other systems. It's going to be the other way around, because it makes more sense to talk about IoT first. Obviously, virtually every smart system needs to understand where it is in the world, and the obvious way to work out where you are in the world is to have some sensors, and those sensors will provide information, but they won't provide information in NGSI-LD normally, so you're going to have to do something about it. So let's get on with the show. First thing you need to worry about whenever you're talking about any NGSI-LD system, and a system with sensors is no different, is you must. Now, the reason I probably put this slide in all three of my presentations is that you must have an appropriate context for the attributes you wish to share. Now, the typical examples which are available in the NGSI-LD tutorials and online, and the things I tend to talk about, I personally tend to use the what were the fireware data models, now the smart data models. And for IoT devices, there is already a smart data model called device. There is another one called, I think, multi-sensor, which is usable where you have more than one reading. But let's face it, most of our IoT devices are relatively dumb. Most of them are retrieving a value, like, temperature reading, or a location like a GPS or whatever, and that's about it. And for that sort of entity, then the what was the fireware data models, now the smart data models, is sufficient to be able to give you what you want, because it's got things like your MAC address, or your OS version, or battery level are defined, and it doesn't, and it deliberately doesn't cover what your actual value is. It kind of follows the Saref definition, in that you have a series of, in our case, attributes. In their case, there'll be separate classes which actually cover the temperature level. So how do you define this in your app context? Well, okay, let's start from the top. From the top, you would do very well to add in any shortenings you want to have on your app context. You can see the first one I've got there is fireware, and you can see that you've got fireware : a large number of places thereafter. This means that the context file itself is a bit shorter, and it means that effectively your accuracy is your HTTPS URI fireware org blah 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 hash accuracy. So it's a copy placeholder. Obviously, there are multiple ontology providers out there. Schema.org is the big daddy, so that's why that's in the list. But you can put in whatever necessary for your domain. Where there are elements beyond your domain, I would also suggest you have one for my personal stuff. Best not to have many of these, and I'll go and explain why in a bit. But if I have a particularly strange ontology which hasn't got well-defined models, then sure, put in example.com, my URI, and use that as necessary. Thereafter, you add in your entities. This will be the types. And you can see that in my particular case, I've got a device, but I've got various extensions of device, like cow collar or temperature sensor or tractor or whatever. And these are not well defined as separate entities within the system. So these are all under example.com. After that, you go through all the attributes, sub-attributes, sub-attributes and what have you, and make sure that they've got proper names. This is a tedious job. However, again, if you look at the NGSI-LD tutorials, there's a little tool which will generate these attributes for you. Now, the point which you need to get across here is that if you want to share this IoT data, you need to have a proper link. If you don't have a proper link, then it will fall into the default context. And sure, you can use it, but it's got no idea to anyone else what it actually means. Now, it's much better to have an accuracy which is a well-known accuracy, or a battery level which is using a well-known IRI for the battery level, because people might want to use that data. You've got to think, what's private to me? In which case, frankly, I don't really care, or which bits am I actually needing to share? And obviously, I can share my using a standard data model. I can share an awful lot of stuff. You can see that when you wherever possible, whenever you come up with a term like, I don't know, temperature, you use whatever the ontology is. Again, looking at the smart farm, randomly heart rate is coming from this biological ontology, because it can, they actually have something for heart rate. And it's better to reuse one that's already out there than to put one to example.com. You can, I've got my custom attribute 1, my custom attribute 2, but it's not really the idea for when you are doing the data sharing. So, okay, we've now got a custom context file. How are we going to use it? IT agents. I assume you know what an IT agent is. It's a mechanism for converting between a transport and payload of a known type into NGSI, in this case NGSI-LD. There are multiple IoT agents in the fireware catalog. They range from say using OPC UA transport within robotics to Sigfox, LoRaWAN, to just getting lumps of JSON. Frankly, it depends on your use case as to what will be most useful for you. For most general cases, it's either going to be ultralight or JSON, I should think, because it's a relatively human readable transport format. So you can actually see what's going on, and it's still relatively tight. Now, in order to set up an IoT agent as NGSI-LD, there are 5 either environment variables or elements within the config.js file, which you'll find at the root of the repository in question, which needs to be or should be set. it is absolutely essential that you set the NGSI version to LD. You could have mixed. There's a you can actually get an IT agent which is capable of dealing with V2 or LD messages, but we're talking about a system which is NGSI-LD only. You need to set it as LD because the default is V2 for obviously backwards compatibility reasons. You know, the IT agents have been around a lot longer than the LD bit of NGSI, and if you don't set that, that will attempt to update to a context broker using the V2 format and using the V2 endpoints, which obviously is not what you want. Second thing you must have is a JSON LD context, which is the one which I mentioned beforehand. Now, this is, as you should appreciate from the previous sessions, is going to say, okay, my temperature is a Saref temperature, my address is a schema.org address, my entity type is a fireware device, whatever. So that is your mapping file, and it's used in absolutely every request that goes to and from the our context broker. The remaining three, which I've highlighted and I've put them in my thing here, are useful. Probably not absolutely essential, but I would put them in anyway because there's no harm in it. The fallback tenant is the first one I'm looking at. Now, as I said, the IT agents are sending information initially in V2 format. They've been extended to use LD. And if you are dealing with actuations, situation where you get an input at the context broker, which is then pushed back to the device itself, it is possible that a header won't be in there to identify which tenant you're talking about. So you put in, if I have no headers being passed, then this is the one which I would prefer to use. There is not yet an equivalent to the fireware service path because that's not defined within the ETSI committee, but it's getting there. Two other points: the timestamp and the autocast. Autocast, I would set to true, even though that's probably not necessary, because within NGSI-LD, you'll every native JSON type plus every GeoJSON type is considered native. So it will try and find a string. It will say, okay, I'm a string. It will try and find an object. It will say, I'm an object. It will try and find a GeoJSON point. It will do that. Now, according to the specification of the interface, autocast is the same thing for NGSI v2, so it's going to be less confusing if you remember to put that in there. The timestamp, as I'm sure you remember from last week, observe that is the non-rarefied sub-attribute, the property of a property, which defines when a reading came in, obviously rather essential in devices, and that is set by flicking that switch. If you don't bother doing that, you're not getting observed at. If you're not getting observed at, you're missing out on a lot of information which is usable by the system. Obviously, you can't get accurate temporal interfaces if you are failing to do that. It's just a matter of configuring the thing properly, and you're fine. It's not a big issue. So how do interactions with an IT agent actually work? This is a very old slide. This is one which was initially designed for the NGSI v2 documentation about 3 years ago. The diagram on the right is, but it still holds up today. It's absolutely a one-directional thing when you have a measure information coming from a a device into a context broker. You can see that you need to have a well-known payload. This is important when we start thinking about legacy systems as well. It's precisely the same thing. You say, okay, what is the format coming into my system? How is it arriving? So we could have ultralight JSON, Sigfox, what have you, but we could be receiving the, say, ultralight message over MQTT, and your IoT agent needs to be able to listen on the appropriate topic to get hold of the information and read it in. So this is the interface between something non-NGSI and something NGSI-LD and the context broker. It's the barrier between the two. You can see that that's also going to be the case with your legacy systems. IoT agent interprets it, transforms it into a measure, pushes up in NGSI-LD. Of course, if you have a device which is high power or constantly on the grid, like say, I don't know, a camera plugged into a wall, maybe you want to have the upsert occur directly on the device itself. That's perfectly possible. The IoT agent that is here to solve the job where the device is dumb, the device is low power, the device can't think, the device can just send a message and that's it, and additional work needs to be done somewhere, either on the edge or in the cloud. So the only interface that a measure deals with is a structured upsert, potentially including linking entities. Obviously, using this thing which I mentioned last week, if I have a cow, a cow has a location, obviously, but the location is provided by the animal collar, which has got the GPS. If the animal collar is, say, has another attribute called battery level, and the battery level is very low, maybe it starts giving errors. And you can see that you could traverse the knowledge graph to find out information about where other information is coming from, so property to property. So that's where the inclusion of linked entities comes in. We'll deal with that in a second. This is what it does. This is fundamentally what any input to a context broker is all about. It is a structured upsert. I take my data, however it is, it could be as a lump of JSON, ultralight, what have you. I make sure that I know what the ID and type of my entity are. I know where I get my at context, because I'll get that from the environment variable, and then I structure in my attributes, my sub-attributes, properties of properties in as necessary. As you can see, for this particular thing, I have got a temperature, which has got observed at, because that would be coming from my timestamp, and then I have a couple of attributes, one rarefied, one non-rarefied attribute. Unit code you should recognize by now as being that this is 25 degrees centigrade, and then of course you can add in additional metadata if you wish, related to attributes. In this case, I'm having an accuracy of 0.95. Unit code C62 is one of your standard UNCFAC codes. It means unitless. It means 0 to 1 basically. So we're saying that the accuracy of that reading is 95%. Also, you can of course have relationships, and that's in this particular case, controlled asset on the device model is putting the device into or onto something, and that is obviously going to be used for linking stuff. So that's what's actually happening under the hood. We can look at some code if necessary later, but how do we actually deal with that within the device? Well, there are two parts. There's a service group and a device. Service group has got things which are common across lots of devices. So in this particular case, I'm coming in with a value called T because I'm trying to keep a nice compact message format, and that is obviously no good in my context broker. I want to call it temperature, and obviously this is a mapping. It's a mapping pretty much like the mapping you get for the at context. But hey, you can see how it works. And obviously this temperature has got metadata, which has got unit code. It could have the accuracy in there, whatever. It's saying whenever I update a temperature, put these static values metadata in with my system. Obviously, if you've got the timestamp, that's going to be an active value. And you can see it's got a type, and because it's NGSI-LD, it will do the conversion automatically. So it will assume that your if you put a string value of the character 2 followed by the character 5, it will convert that to 25.0 as a float, because it's saying all the usual JSON types can be put in here. The other things that you might want to put in here are either property or relationship, because obviously you could have a static property which is obviously an object or an array or something like that. But basically any native JSON type will do. If you put in something like, I don't know, type address, which would be perfectly valid NGSI v2, but it's not a recognized JSON-LD type, you will end up with an object which gets an extra @type attribute added to it called address. So you can use the a syntax which is closer to v2 if you wish, but it's I wouldn't encourage it. I'd go for your JSON types where possible, and property if it's something else. You can see there are various elements here which are useful or static. So in this particular case, because we're using ultralight, we have an API key to make sure that we can work out that the data is properly recognized coming from where it should be coming from. Context broker is saying where we're pushing it to, obviously. Protocol is just a static field saying what it is so that we can do some filtering if necessary when we're doing this request. The transport could be HTTP, MQTT, blah, 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 blah. Time zone is obviously so that the observed that can be pushed to Zulu time, because that's what must be put into and observe that. Every field in every date field in NGSI-LD is an ISO timestamp, so it needs to be on Zulu time. And then you've got potentially you've got attributes, static attributes, or lazy attributes. Static attributes being stuff that comes in and changes. Static attributes is stuff which we push every time we go in. Obviously, it's going to be useful to know which devices have got a temperature, are controlling temperature. So that's what control property is there for. You could also add in your GeoJSON types if you wish. So having got the general idea as to what's going on with groups, stuff which will come across multiple elements, you can move on to actually looking at the devices themselves. And the device itself would be recognized by the ID that's coming in, and that again is a mapping. So I could have as my device ID coming in from from the device, and that obviously that's completely unusable. So let's make it a proper URN, and you can put your URN into the device temperature 001, which if you don't define an entity name, it will give you a URN based on the entity type. So that would be URN NGSI-LD device : and then whatever it was above. But ideally, when you're talking about individual devices, you can actually map them directly to proper URNs. One thing which you can add in to static attributes is a link element. The link element is saying for the controlled asset, for this relationship, any active attributes which change should also have a provided by on that particular element. So in this case, if you set up the link element like that, when the temperature device changes, it will also change the building 0001 entity and give it a temperature attribute, will obviously be provided by coming from the device in question. This means that because all we're actually doing is an upsert, this means that we can easily update two NGSI-LD entities as one, and we can just keep on doing what's necessary. Now, there is a bit of code inside the IT agent node lib, which means that it can deal more easily with GeoJSON. GeoJSON has to be placed in the format shown on the right of this screen. It has to have a type of geoproperty. It has to have a value which is a valid GeoJSON type, either point or multi-point or polygon or whatever. Okay, in this case, unobserved at, but this is obviously not necessarily the case with what's coming in. You may have a payload that is receiving strings like ultralight, and it could just be a comma separated list. You'd want to put that in as a proper location if you're doing it in NGSI-LD. It is possible you might want to have latitude and longitude separately. You can also do that, but you'd need to use an expression to decide that this is actually a GeoJSON property. The expression could say expression at lang, comma at dollar at lang, I think it is, dollar at long. No, it's long lat, isn't it? Sorry, wrong way around. Which would mean you'd end up with three attributes in there. But if you're going to do anything geofencing, anything along those lines, you need to put it in as GeoJSON, and all of the following formats are supported. So it does its best job to try and make your geoproperties. Obviously, you can't create a location of type geoproperty and just put a string in the value. That's just invalid, and the context broker won't take it. So it has to make its best effort. If for some reason you are dealing with a format which you can't get in one of these 5 things on the screen, then you're going to have to do some pre-processing before pushing it to the context broker. You have to have a customize your IoT agent. I can imagine a situation where, say, for example, you're using Sigfox, you're reading in bytes from a stream, and then that needs to be manipulated into one of these formats before it gets pushed to the context broker. Yeah, here we go. This is the syntax for the expression. You should realize that location is a special name. Location is one of the values which is defined in the core context. So use it. Observation space is another one if necessary, but they do have real names. So observation space is the area in which a device operates. So as I said, you need to set the type. Must set the type to geoproperty within the IT agent, because this is backwards compatible for NGSI v2. You can put in type geocolon whatever, either type point, type multi-point, type polygon, type GeoJSON, and it will attempt to modify it accordingly. The lower of those two syntaxes is actually the one which would be syntactically correct for NGSI v2. But yeah, all of these are going to be a geo property within NGSI-LD. So yeah, if you've got a string coming in and you know it's going to be a polygon, just use geopolygon, what have you. You can, of course, as I said, alias the longitude and latitude as separate inputs. So you could have an attribute called lung, an attribute called lat, and then you could actually have another one called location. Nothing wrong with having multiple ways of reading your data if that's useful for you. I believe that's one of the things which came up with the session last week as well, wasn't it? So that some people have latitude and longitude. Obviously, location will only update if both latitude and longitude are present in the payload. So that is how you get information flowing from the context from the device up to the context broker. It's a glorified Upsert, and all that an IoT agent is it's a mapping and parsing engine. The reverse is slightly more complex in that it requires an update. But you can do the same thing as you usually at the moment. The commonest format for actuations is using registrations, and effectively, when you provision your device, you say, "Oh, by the way, this attribute is mine," and the request is forwarded, saying, "Yes, this is your." There is an alternative for subscriptions, which I will show you as well. If you're using Orion LD, which I believe you are, it shouldn't be necessary. Because Orion LD supports the idea of having a registration which is attached to a single context broker. If you are looking at doing a federation of context brokers, then you are probably going to need to use this subscriptions and notifications payload instead. It's not difficult to change the provisioning. It may be the case, and this is a proviso, it may be the case that once the ETSI committee have decided precisely how actuation should work, that the library will need to change. This is not an issue for you, this is an issue for the library, because it will do all the necessary changes and work. That's the whole point about using a common library in the middle. Now, as you can see from the flow diagram, user says, "Oi, I want to do something," and it's the context broker needs to work out whether it can deal with it or it needs to pass this on to somewhere else. Now, in a registration, it's a case of there's already something else has registered saying, "I will deal with switching on the lamp." In the case of a bidirectional attribute, there will already be a subscription saying, "Whenever you switch on the lamp, inform me." Slightly different, but either way, the IoT agent does get informed and say, "This device URN NGSI-LD device XYZ, something has happened." Now, obviously, that URN is not necessarily the way the device calls itself within the real world, so there needs to be a device lookup to say, okay, so you actually mean device XYZ. And then at that point, because the IoT agent can say, "Yes, I can deal with this, but it's not going to be a synchronous response," it will update the state of the device command to pending, and then it will somehow tell the device to go off and do it. It could be the case that you have a slow communications protocol like MQTT, where maybe your device only wakes up every 20 minutes, so it could be left in pending for quite some time. If you're talking with a direct communication with HTTP, where you actually have a handshake with the device directly, it won't be pending very long at all. So hopefully something happens or an error message occurs, and at that point the status of the actuator is updated in the context broker. So internally, what happens is as follows. You provision a device by saying, "I need to have an idea where that device is listening. In this particular case, it's listening on an HTTP endpoint. As I said, I need this mapping where it's got the URN in the context broker, but it's got device 001 in the real world, and it needs a couple of commands, whatever that means. The command could, of course, have data in it as well, but by provisioning an IoT agent as shown, you will kick off a context registration. Context registration, once again, you can see that it says, I am an IoT agent, you are IoTagent.com, whatever. Tell me when you want to muck around with this particular attribute or attributes. Obviously, that is means that it will receive a forwarding request. So you would just do a patch, and the patch would be forwarded as a patch, same as it was beforehand. And that is then parsed by the IoT agent itself, reads in the NGSI-LD, transforms it to the whatever the protocol happens to be, does all the low-level stuff so that you can abstract this out away from the context broker, and all is well with the world. So the alternative is called in the documentation called bidirectional attribute provisioning, which is actuation via a subscription. Once again, you can see the syntax of the provisioning, the one in green, has changed, but the header part is all the same. It's saying, I'm still a device. I've still got an endpoint in the real world. I've still got a name within the real world and a name within the context broker, and I have attributes. Now, you can see here that this has got an attribute of type text, which again I believe is an aliased as string anyway. So it's just basically it's a string. It could be, you could just put type property in there if you wanted to, and you need an expression and a reverse. This reverse is saying, what does this attribute mean in the device itself? And by adding in a syntax like that, it will say, okay, within when I receive a ring, which could have additional parameters in it, send R, because the object ID is always the stuff which comes down to the device, send R with the following expression, which in this case is just directly the string ring attribute down elsewhere. So if I in this particular case, if the context broker itself sends a subscription, because you actually already set up that subscription when you provision the device automatically, it will have data in the appropriate format. It will be an array which has got a series of entity IDs. Usually one in this particular case, but for a subscription, you'd end up you could have it affecting multiple entities at once. But in this case, it's almost certainly going to be one, and that will in turn have whatever data you're passing into it. In this case, I'm putting in filling, but it could be ring or whatever, and it would have that information could be then used to be passed down into the system below. And that is how you communicate between NGSI-LD and context brokers via an IoT agent. You'll find that doing the same thing for legacy systems is pretty similar, because the whole point here is that we are dealing with systems which are non-NGSI-LD, which then need to be able to talk somehow to an NGSI-LD system. So When you're thinking about input, you always think this is an upsert. When you're thinking about output is probably going to be your registration. It might be the subscription. But what you need to think about is, okay, how am I going to get the legacy processing data into NGSI-LD format, or vice versa? Because obviously we could be sending data down as well. So what options have we got here? Well, I could, if this is relevant, say I've got my third-party system, and I could say, okay, what am I going to do now? I'm going to add in a bit of code that whenever something happens, I want to do an upsert into my context broker, which is going back to, I'll go back to the right slides, where we go. Oh, wrong, too far. It's all I need to do is to get my device or whatever to say, I will send an upsert of the relevant context data when something happens. Now, this is obviously, in this particular case, a curl statement, because it's quite a simple way of putting things on the screen. But you can, there we go, very easily use whatever library you want. It's just an HTTP endpoint, so you can use your Java system, your Python system, your node system, whatever. I don't. It's not difficult to send. Indeed, if you look at the Postman collections we've got, you can just click a button and do it in the syntax you prefer. So I could go around, modify my code, say, okay, what bits of my legacy system do I need as context data? I can then say, okay, whenever those things change, directly do a send of NGSI to my context broker. This is the equivalent of your plugged-in device. Now, obviously, most legacy systems will have a constant power supply, so this is a perfectly valid thing to do, is to just modify them to say, okay, I've got my shipping details. I need effectively a copy of my shipping details in my context broker, so that the I am able to offer that into the data lake and offer that copy of my data for data exchange, because I know that the data I've placed into my context broker is in a consumable format. The problem you have with legacy systems, of course, is that it's probably not the case that you want to you're not going to have everything in a format that everybody can read. It's just the agreement which is made within I4 Trust is that we will talk in this using this protocol, and therefore you need to make sure that it's directly into that protocol. Now, an alternative, which is not real time, but again write time, is that you could have a system which is passing data using some other format, like periodically it creates a file. It creates a CSV file, let's say, because there's already a Wednesday webinar which deals with that. Out of my legacy system, I can get a format. If I can get a format, I can then periodically request it. I can then push that up into a microservice, which is effectively an agent. I wouldn't say it's necessarily an IoT agent, because it's not necessarily IoT devices, but it is effectively an agent. But you can see a CSV file is, again, a well-defined format, but it's almost certainly custom, because obviously the headers you have will depend on what real meaning you put for it. So you'll need to manipulate the data within that file. However, what you'd get is you get a little microservice which would upload that data manipulate it so it becomes, parse it, which is the same job as the IT agent, and then do the upsert as necessary to push the data into the system. Bear in mind whenever you're doing this is to where your barriers are, how you define the domain of each system. Obviously, this agent itself is within the domain of the legacy system because it is pushing to the context broker, or pushing to its context broker. Its context broker is also within the domain of the legacy system because it's only going to hold the entities which are defined by the legacy system. And that is the edge of the interface, so that you end up with a system which is holding NGSI-LD data, which can then communicate with other systems which can talk to NGSI-LD data. So again, take the example of the veterinary practice. I could have a database which has got all my cows in it. I need to be able to transform that into a readable selection of animal records, NGSI-LD animal records, which have got agreed attributes like legal ID, so that other third parties can meaningfully query using the standard syntax. Another thing you can do, if maybe you can't push, but maybe you need to pull. Maybe you need to use a cron job and say, okay, give me what you've got. I will now deal with it. Both of these may be the case, depending on what you're trying to achieve. On the right, you can see a very simple example of how you could take information. In this case, it's taking an NGSI information, pushing it to a database. But you can use this as a communications tool as well. If you can take any data format, and presumably you know your legacy data format anyway, you can do whatever you like with it. And this particular case, push it to MongoDB. Why not? If you can push to MongoDB, you can read from MongoDB, and you could actually have a situation where you have the database format is your intermediary. Those of you who saw the Wednesday webinar on combining NGSI and Grafana will realize that this is how data was being displayed into the Grafana tool. There needed to be a format exchange between NGSI and one of the formats which Grafana can deal with. Obviously, you can add in plugins in that case to modify things as necessary, but it's the same as trying to deal with legacy system. So yeah, within your domain, upsert to your context broker, and your context broker will hold the entities. Won't do anything else, but it'll at least hold some entities. We're now getting a little bit more repetitive, because obviously you may want to extend your legacy system so that it is able to do stuff. I need to communicate over that domain barrier to tell my legacy system to go off and do something. So imagine that this is an example of using tweets, which is again within the tutorials. Imagine I want to keep my Twitter feed in one domain, and I need to be able to push information from my one context broker to another to say go off and do something with this legacy system. You can see that the legacy system, the URL, both the patch and get in this particular case, tell me about X or update X, is a well-defined NGSI-LD call. The way that NGSI-LD deals with registrations means that there is little difference between directly doing a get on a context broker or indirectly doing a get on a context broker. So if I'm registered to say, oh, this attribute, this Attra's tweets comes from elsewhere, I will go through this third-party system. Now, in this particular case, I have got an interface which I have defined as saying, okay, this interface speaks patch and it speaks get and it deals with these particular endpoints. Very simple. It's a very simple Node.js interface. So I can then read, do something, get as NGSI-LD or push, update the entity as NGSI as necessary. Now this is a case where the microservice I'm talking about would be within the main domain, not the legacy domain, because it could then be registered to the main context broker. And then the microservice itself would do this NGSI get as NGSI-LD, and NGSI proxy function, whatever it's called, to go off and do what's necessary. There's a function which I have helpfully called do something. Based on the data that I have got within my request, go off and do something. So you can see from the upper curl request, all I've got there is the name of the entity and the name of the attribute, and that is all the information I would need to be able to put into do something. Obviously, do something can then retrieve information. It would then, in this particular case, get as NGSI-LD. It's going to potentially request something third party, which could be any API, whatever you like, get hold of some data from somewhere, format it as NGSI-LD, so the agreed attributes, and then send it as a response coming back. It may or may not return an at context as part of its payload, because this will depend on what the get is accepting. If it's says I just want application JSON, it should return application JSON. If it wants to say application LD plus JSON, it should have an at context within the attribute itself. For the patch, obviously, it's the same idea. Is that I have 3 places now rather than 2 where I can hide useful data. I can either put it on the path or various parts of the path, or I can place it in the place it into the body of the payload. And again, what would happen is that NGSI-LD update entity would take the various parts of the HTTP request so that you can then talk to your third-party system. Your third-party system would then be able to read the data, make a request. At that point, you have to do the transformation. So you're effectively, whenever you're talking with legacy systems, you're doing the same job as you would do with the an IoT. In this particular case, we know that the input is patch, and we know that our third-party system does X, Y, Z. Well, we are responsible in this microservice to be able to do this transformation so that I can talk to my third-party system. Finally, you can do the same thing with subscriptions. inform me, event-driven NGSI, inform me about X so I can go off and do something. This is usable by all sorts of systems, and is particularly useful when you're going across data barriers. You can see there the format of a subscription, which has got name the attributes, so name the entities involved and the attributes you have requested. So therefore, if you have set a subscription to an endpoint called blah 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 type, I can iterate across the data in question, and I can in this case do something for each item. It's an example I have of this within the tutorials is I am able to push to a database quite easily, because you just do a subscription for something you know, and it just pushes all the information to that database. It could be a shared database. You need to think about which interfaces you're actually dealing with. Once again, we have all the usual useful links for the video. You need to worry about your I don't know why I've got the version 1.3 of the Etsy specification. It's been 1.4 now. That's the old version. You need to think about your data coming in is going to be NGSI-LD, and therefore it will be valid JSON-LD. You may want to do operations such as a compaction expansion in order to transform your data before you make the request to legacy third-party system. That's perfectly possible. It is probable that you want to look at more detail in the tutorials, but the full details of what's actually going on is within the Etsy specification. As I've noticed on my slide, that says 1.3. The latest specification, I believe, is 1.4.2. 1.4.1 is stable. 1.4.2, I think, is has got a patch fix on it. So I'll update that link. But they're all under the same location from Etsy. That fully describes what a context broker should do. Now, the vast majority of context brokers I know are compliant to 1.3. Obviously, this is a living specification, and therefore it is necessary to push certain parts of the new specification might not be in there yet. But if you look at the 1.3, you're going to be pretty. You should be pretty solid. Meanwhile, of course, as I said at the top of the hour, we're talking about data models. Make sure that you use models which are appropriate. When you are defining the data exchange between your legacy system and your current system, then you need to be able to model that appropriately. So you need to have an agreed modeling system. And that is the main part of the presentation completed. So I will now open the floor to questions.
Yeah, indeed, we have one question. It goes, what is the sense of setting the supported protocol as static attribute in the service group?
Right. Is that chat or questions? Questions. What is the sense of setting supported protocol as a static attribute in the service group? Querying is the answer there. If I want to find out which devices are supporting ultralight, because as far as NGSI is concerned, the unique selling point or the top line first slide I received when I first joined the Fireware Foundation was saying you can do a patch on your NGSI system, and something will happen. Now, therefore, the context broker has got no understanding about what's going on underneath. That's somebody else's problem. It's the IoT agent's problem. And if it's the IoT agent's problem and something goes wrong, then it won't be easy to work out from the context broker that, I've lost all my HTTP. So it's worthwhile adding in additional static data to systems so that you can either query them, or you can filter by them, or you can potentially use that for debug information. A lot of context data doesn't change very much, but is just useful. We take addresses, for example. What's the point of putting an address? It's only because I want to be able to read it at some point. Presumably, you set the supported protocol because I might want to read it at some point. I'd have to have a look at the device in more detail, but the device data model has got information about that particular device, and it's got a relationship to another data model, which is confusingly called device model, which has got the common stuff. So if you have, a particular device, then you can have effectively a static relationship to a model which isn't going to change, which is going to say, the device documentation can be found here. And that's the way that Sarif preferred it. So that's the way that the model works. So static attributes have their uses if they are useful within the system. If you don't need it, then don't bother.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Okay. I have one like, so I think that the question is answered. Any more questions? Oh, I have a raised hand.
The raised hand.
Yep.
Daniel wants to come up. Yeah, come on, let's have an argument.
Hello. Hi, Jason. Yes, another question about the location format that you can set from the IoT agents. You said that there are many ways to do it, and the IoT agent can handle it. That's why you said you set up the autocast configuration attribute on the IoT agent deployment?
It's more of a gotcha than absolutely necessary. Autocast is an NGSI v2 function. And the way that NGSI v2 works is if you have something called float, it will try and make it a float. If you have something called string, it'll try and make it a string. Now, NGSI-LD can't work that way because your types are either property or relationship, or geoproperty, or language property. But they're either property or relationship, or some type of property, right? So therefore, you cannot have a type called float directly. Well, that's kind of restrictive, isn't it? So the way that the code currently works is that if you define any of the native types like float or number or whatever, it will transform it automatically. Well, that only occurs in NGSI v2 if you set that field. So I can imagine a situation where, let's say you deliberately set that as false, right? It won't do what you expect. Do you get what I'm saying there, Daniel?
Okay, yeah, I got it. So the different ways that we can provide the location information, it is, I think, just by like a feature is by implementation. You have that in the IoT agent to connect with the NGSI-LD Orient Context Broker.
Well, within NGSI-LD part of the IoT agent, it does a best guess. So it assumes that you've it sees if you can transform it as GeoJSON directly. If you can, great. You can do that for the JSON IoT agent anyway. You can pass into the IoT agent proper GeoJSON, but there are obviously multiple simpler formats. So it does things like, can I chop this as a comma delimited string into a series of numbers? Can I parse this number as a number? Now, the GeoJSON is always going to be long lat, isn't it? So if you're putting in the data as lat long, for example, it's going to completely screw up where it thinks stuff is. So you're going to have to, in that particular case, you're going to have to, for example, create your own a plugin for your IoT agent to actually muck it around. Much better just send the data in the right format. But it's trying its best. So it's a best effort, and it's essential for LD. Obviously, the way that V2 has developed, people have probably generally used latitude and longitude separate attributes, and of course you can do that using the expression plugin and just get that working as well. But that's it's giving you the option to have multiple ways of getting the information across.
Okay. Another question about the add context that you have to provide when you deploy the IoT agent. It is, for me, it is weird because how do you, in the way that you, for example, provide the Fiber platform with IoT agents already deployed, how are you going to provide this context at?
At context file.
Yeah.
Well, as you probably know, I deal with toy systems. So what I do is I just spin up an implementation of HTTPD, and I attach a volume to it and say serve all these files. And I've got quite a file there. But yeah, you need to have a public URL which is available for externals to actually read, to understand which models we're actually talking about. Because if you think about it, your attributes are actually not using those short names which you want to use within your system. They're actually using the really long names, using the IRIs throughout. And that is so cumbersome and annoying that nobody wants to do that. So there's this mapping file. So this mapping file has to be put somewhere publicly, and it should just be a static file. Now, you and I both know that it will need to be updated at some point, and I am not sure how easy it is to amend those context files at the moment. Again, this is something which I believe the ETSI committee needs to work out how you can refresh the files. But in the ideal solution, you have all your attributes set up. You have your domain defined before you start, which is why I have endeavoured to start each of these sessions by saying, define your context, define the context, define the context, because doing it at the end is never going to work. You need to think, what are my models first? It needs to be a model-driven system rather than oh, by the way, now we've got some data, we've got to try and sort out what the attributes are. Another point which is of use is that, as I said, if you define something which is in the don't define something in the context file, it falls into the default domain, and that is not useful for data exchange. There's no problem with having an attribute locally on the default context. You can still use it because as far as your system is concerned, it's in the default context, but it's got no semantic meaning in, say, Sharifa's version, because third party, when they read this attribute, say, what on earth is one of those? Oh, it's a default context, blah, blah, blah. Well, what's one of those? It's not, we've not made an agreement over that particular attribute.
Okay, but why not we should have the opportunity to set this context file in the registration of the service group, for example?
Probably because at the moment it hasn't been available that long, and if it needs to be on a different level, it needs to be on a different level. All the IT agents are and all the IT agent code is open source. It would be perfectly possible to patch them. I was responsible for doing the first draft for the NGSI-LD conversion, and I have got it working based on the definitions from the ETSI committee at the time, back in January, February last year. I fully expect them to be completely wrong, because obviously the specification is changing. And I also expect that, changes like saying we want to have a different context file for different groups is something which needs to be added in at some point. It will be easy enough to do. The way that the IT agent node lib works is that usually there are things at 3 levels. There's things at the environment variable level, which I showed on screen, and then you can do it on group or device. It would just be a matter of just put it into group and device, and then just retrieve it. The reason why I didn't consider putting that in first draft is because, firstly, it's first draft. Secondly, is I would normally consider that the models are something which is not changing, because I am defining cows across the board. So I would define my world first. But if someone wants to alter the context, say, okay, as far as this attribute is concerned, I'm putting in that value, that would be doable as well. I would normally do that, change the context when I'm making the request to the context broker. So I would be considering it from when I'm retrieving as a third party, rather than when I've been coming up with data from devices. But your position may be different. So yeah, perfectly possible to change that.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
If anyone wants to start raising a PR on the IT agent node lib, go ahead.
Okay. Thank
you. With all of these third-party open source components, if the functionality isn't there, then the thing to do is to raise an issue on GitHub, talk to the developers who are responsible for the code, because they might have it in their roadmap for all you know. You say, yes, we know about that. We're planning to do that next month, and then get an agreement up front as to is this something that needs to be done, and then just create a PR. Create a PR. Obviously, you need to create a PR to the satisfaction of the team in question. These are usually industrial level pieces of code, so you won't get away with not having unit tests or proper code coverage and stuff like that. But yeah, it's open source, so it is open for amendment if necessary. And I fully expect that some of my code will not be there in a year's time. It'll have your name on it, won't it, Daniel?
Okay. The point that question came to my mind was that I know that by now we don't have the service path into the NGSI-LD headers and that property, but as we have this in NGSI v2, I imagine it could be in the future in NGSI-LD, and in this different service path, you usually have different information provider where perhaps they work in different add context file.
Yeah,
So,
that would make sense. What you're saying there.
Yeah.
Well, the one and only reason that there's nothing on service path in the IoT agent node lib NGSI-LD part is because there is currently nothing in the current NGSI-LD specification about service path. So anything which went in there would by definition be wrong, because if it's not in the spec, it's not in there. Now,
Okay.
if there's a need to get additional changes made to the specification, people need to join ETSI and talk to the ETSI committee to say, you know, we need this. The reason why NGSI-LD tenant was added in, and that wasn't in there either at one point, was precisely because of such lobbying. Because a real user, I can't remember precisely who, but a real user pointed out that for legal reasons, you need to be able to divide your data into separate databases.
Yeah.
And therefore, not having this makes the specification unusable. Now, the service path is a bit different in that it has its uses, but it's not universally used.
Yeah.
So it's something where there would need to be a player who says, yes, we need this for the following reasons, X, Y, Z. And the way that the ETSI committee works is done by consensus. So I can't see there being much problem in adding it in if there is a valid use case for it. If there isn't a valid use case for it, then the obvious way round it would be to do some sort of processing using a proxy outside of the context broker. So, for example, another thing which NGSI v2 does, which NGSI-LD doesn't, is custom notifications. Custom notifications along the lines of I send a notification and it sends me a string. Now, the philosophy behind the NGSI-LD specification is that all communications coming out of the NGSI-LD context broker are NGSI-LD. And therefore, if you wanted to get a string, or you wanted to get your dates in French or whatever, then that's your problem, not the context broker's problem. And the reason behind that is that keeps it more generic for other third-party systems to know they will get stuff in a NGSI-LD type format. So in that particular case, there's a reason why something was not moved through to the NGSI-LD specification. But for service path, I think it's purely because the members of the committee who are updating the specification haven't found a relevant use case within their domain.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Any more nasty questions? If that's all your questions I've got at the moment, what I suggest we do is take a break. I'm going to go off and grab myself a cup of coffee because I've been talking for an hour and a half. And then once I've got my coffee back, I'm going to sit down in one of the on one of the tables until we get the next session. Does that sound good to you, Sharifa?
Yes. Do you wanna come back at 10:30 or 35?
10:30. So give yourself a bit of time to get the coffee because my mouth's a bit dry.
Yeah.
and then Daniel and I can have another shouting match.
Yeah. Okay.
see you soon out in the lobby.
See you. Hello. I hope I didn't interrupt your conversation. Jason, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're back. No, I was saying I hope I didn't interrupt your conversation in the lounge.
No, it's not a problem. That's the way it works, isn't it? Now, I was chatting with Daniel and Mannix again, which is good. I mean, to be honest, you know how these things work. You go to a conference, it is always the conversations you have at coffee which are more interesting than the actual presentations. Someone's got a hand up.
Daniel is raising.
Daniel wants mic access again.
Yeah.
Let him in. Come on. Hiya, Daniel.
Hi.
Back again.
I'm going to turn on the web camera just to say hello to everybody. I have another question about the configuration of the IoT agent that you said that you have to, or you have the option to put the service in this configuration. I don't know if it's a matter also on the NGSI v2, but what is the idea? Why do you suggest this on this configuration file?
From my understanding, when you provision an IoT agent, you are required to put in a fireware service when you are doing the provisioning. That's the NGSI v2 syntax. Now that maps directly to an NGSI-LD tenant, so that's great, and it means that you put it into a separate database. So as far as I know, for the IoT agents, you can't use the default text. Well, you could. I think you could put fireware service equals / which is default tenant, and just use that if you wanted to. But the problem being that you need to put in a fireware service. So since you need to put in a fireware service, I tend to put in a fireware service. And this has the effect of pushing it to a separate database. Obviously, in a system where you have an IoT agent which is servicing multiple users, multiple tenants, this could be very useful because it separates their data. It could also be potentially a good idea for increasing throughput, because obviously if you've got multiple databases which are doing which are accepting reads, you're less likely to get a blockage. So my understanding is it's always been done that way. Someone could possibly, who's been in the fireware world longer than I have, could possibly say why it might be done, but I can see it's done that way anyway, so we're following that paradigm.
Okay. One question, but it is not related to the webinar of today, the training session. It is more related with the business API and the marketplace tool. And I couldn't follow this session, but I don't know if there is a way to make a subscription through this business API on the context broker to receive notifications when the rule match. It is the way, or it is only for making queries?
I don't know is the simple answer. I would have to find out myself. Since it's not directly talking to context broker, it's not really my area. So we'd have to talk to another expert to get a definitive answer on that. I don't know, Sharif, can you say what the best way to ask him questions for speakers who aren't here is?
Yeah, I was just going to say Dennis, and he raised his hand. So I'm gonna hand him.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi there.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I think on the funding workspaces, I already had a similar question. Basically, I would say yes, it is possible, because of the structure of these policies what I've shown, because you define basically just the HTTP method you would allow, the entity type, and maybe certain attributes. And in the case for the subscriptions, it's just an request of type subscription in the post request. So basically, if you structure the policy that way, that you allow post requests for type of subscription, then it should be possible to make API Umbrella accept these subscription requests. I hope this answers the question.
Daniel says okay. I guess the question again. If there's anything more you want to discuss, Daniel, you're welcome to come back and speak. Okay, but he asks, but can the API umbrella count the notification or something like that?
Basically, yes. So API Umbrella also allows the tracking of the requests. What we are currently working on is an integration then also with the marketplace. So in order that, for instance, if you have a pay-per-view price model configured there, that these tracking of these requests also in the end land in the charging backend component of the business API ecosystem. But in the API umbrella itself, you can already track all requests. And technically, API umbrella doesn't care about whether now it's a request where you are posting some new entities or retrieving information of entities, or if you just send a request for creating a subscription. Because in the end, for API umbrella, it's just HTTP requests.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Dennis.
Okay.
Yeah, Daniel just said okay, thanks. I guess it's answered. I think if there's no more questions, then Jason can go on now.
Is that?
If there's no more questions, then you will probably go on, yeah?
Well, I was only doing the hour and a half today. I wasn't doing the 3 hours. I was doing an hour and a half.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I could go into more details on the way I've connected stuff up in the past if it would help. But the main presentation was the bit which I did before the coffee break.
Yeah. If Daniel says no more questions,
No more questions from Daniel. Anyone else got anything? Whilst read it, or something else they'd like to see from how to connect to their legacy systems. Obviously, the problem with anything on legacy systems is it very much depends on your system. So it's very difficult to come up with hard and fast rules here. But hopefully, the session we had beforehand should give you the general principles, which is treat your third party in the same way as you would treat your devices.
I don't know, Jason, do you want to end the session, or do you want to go back to the lounge if there was a conversation going on there?
I say, well, as I usually do when I wind up these things. If you've forgotten something, I'm available the usual places on LinkedIn, Stack Overflow, blah blah blah, and we can discuss later. But yeah, I think unless there's more questions on this particular area, I think we can wind this particular session up.
Actually, Annette just posted something.
Okay.
Yeah, she says, I'm asking Ben, our lead developer, whether he has questions. Okay, she's asking if he has something. So I guess.
Okay, well, I'll certainly hang around and open the question, because obviously one reason why you don't want to sit in front of a load of PowerPoint slides all the time is that it will depend on your system. So it's going to be a matter of trying to give some consultancy and advice on your system, which will obviously be different to my system. So yeah, I'm perfectly happy to hang around and answer questions.
Okay. Means I can end the session here, and you can still hang out in the lounge. Right?
Okay, so we should go. I should move to the lounge. I mean, I can stay here or go to the lounge. It doesn't really matter.
True.
Yeah. Okay. He's not going to answer. Yeah. Fine. It's always the case. You never get the questions directly. You get them a little bit later, and they're always harder that way.
True.
So yeah, just reach out and ask me directly if you find there's something more useful.
All right, then we will end the session. Thank you, Jason.
Okay, no problem.
And to the audience, see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.